It was appropriately raining. Not the hearty, soul-cleansing rain of an August thunderstorm, nor the impotent drizzle of March that soaks the shoulders and withers the will, but a solid, middle-class English rain. The sort that spoke of respectable Wellington boots and green umbrellas, and fell as if by arrangement with the local vicar, only between the hours of luncheon and tea. Lord Peter Death-Breeden Wimsey, resplendent in an old belted trench coat that had once belonged to a Belgian general, was perched lazily like a particularly literary gargoyle on the edge of a mahogany sideboard in the front hall of Wyveton Grange. His right hand cupped a brandy glass with more disinterest than devotion. His left tapped the rim of his monocle, which hung about his neck like a faintly disapproving relative. "It is a truth universally unacknowledged," he said aloud to no one, "in particular, that a dress which vanishes must either have been worn, burned, or mistaken for a curtain by a half-blind housemaid." He turned his head minutely and addressed the constable near the door with the air of one setting a mouse-trap in a cathedral. "And yet, Bunter tells me the missing gown was red silk with gold embroidery, not something one overlooks while dusting the umbrella stand." "Yes, my lord," said the constable, who was not at all sure what had been asked, but had learned that agreement with Lord Peter Wimsey was generally the safer course. It had begun, like most of the more unsavoury matters in polite society, at a wedding rehearsal. Miss Leonora Price, a girl of agreeable cheekbones and regrettably ambitious poetry, was to be married to Mr. Basil Fordingbridge, a solicitor with a laugh like a goat in a collapsing pantry. The ceremony was scheduled for Saturday. The murder occurred on Thursday, somewhere between the fitting of the bridesmaids' dresses and the discovery of the housekeeper's unfortunate collection of penny dreadfuls. The body was discovered in the small parlour behind the east wing, a room generally used for reading old menus and forgetting anniversaries. Mrs. Agatha Ray, cousin to the groom and a well-known sufferer of delicate nerves, had stumbled upon it at precisely 3:17 p.m. according to the parlour clock, which had not kept proper time since Edward VII last smoked a cigar in its vicinity. "It was horrible," Mrs. Ray repeated for the 5th time to the assembled guests who had been hastily corralled into the drawing-room. "She was lying there in the middle of the hearth-rug. No, she wasn't lying. She was arranged, as if for, oh dear, the theatre, and she was wearing only her petticoat." This last revelation had caused old Colonel Bracknell to choke on his Madeira and remark that if women must expire in states of undress, the least they could do was choose less expensive carpet. Lord Peter had arrived shortly after tea, having been summoned by an exasperated Inspector Bledlow, who knew better than to expect help from London, and worse than to try solving an upper-class murder without aristocratic oversight. Wimsey had taken precisely 7 minutes to examine the body, make an unsavoury pun about dying for fashion, and ask why the fire had been lit on such a mild day. The room bore the marks of a deliberately constructed chaos: a shattered teacup, a lace glove stained with rainwater, though the room's only window was latched, a needlepoint cushion, embroidered with the phrase "Quietude is queenly," lying face down beneath the coal scuttle, and of course no sign of the scarlet and gold dress. "The thing that bothers me," Wimsey mused now, swinging his feet like a child at a particularly pompous sermon, "isn't that she was murdered, but that she was left out like a half-read novel. One cannot help but feel the killer lacked follow-through. Bunter, did you find the hem of the dress in the kitchen range?" "No, my lord," said Bunter, entering from the servants' corridor with the air of a man announcing a bishop's hernia in polite company. However, there were fresh traces of carbolic soap and a set of damp footprints, very small, probably female, leading toward the scullery entrance. "Interesting," murmured Wimsey without interest. He sipped the brandy, winced slightly, and added, "I say, isn't it rather bad form to go murdering the bridesmaid before the big day?" "Poor taste, what?" Whether the comment was flippant or deeply meaningful was, as usual, left unclear. Behind him, the storm increased its fervour, and a peculiar creaking sound echoed from the west wing, perhaps the settling of old timbers or something less architectural. "Yes," said Lord Peter, rising and handing the brandy to a footman who didn't want it. "I believe we ought to start with the servants. One always does. Someone, somewhere, must have seen a scarlet dress pass by in the rain and failed to think." it peculiar. He paused at the threshold, tipped his hat at the weeping willow beyond the window and added with a grin, "After all, my dear Bunter, the true criminal never stains their hands. They merely send the laundry out." With that, Lord Peter Wimsey strode into the house where death, disarray, and an inexplicably missing dress awaited his peculiar attentions. Lord Peter's shoes made little sound on the parquet as he passed. From the front hall into the service corridor, though one footman had made a game attempt at dusting the floor into submission earlier that morning. The scent of lavender polish clung stubbornly to the air, battling the duller smell of wet wool and scorched toast that habitually leaked from the kitchen. Wimsey, nose slightly lifted like a hound sniffing foxes in the abstract, moved with the precise air of one visiting a rather dull club library, interested but not committed. Bunter followed 2 paces behind, notebook in hand, his expression registering the same unreadable serenity one might find on the better sort of funeral statuary. The sound of a kettle whistling came faintly from the scullery, where an undermaid darted out of view like a rabbit, convinced of its own guilt. "Start with the housekeeper, Bunter. It's always the housekeeper, if only for moral symmetry," Wimsey said, pausing at the door marked housekeeper's room and rapping with 2 gentle knuckles. "Enter," came the clipped reply from within, followed by the unmistakable sound of a teacup being placed with unnecessary force upon a saucer. Mrs. Vetch, a tall woman whose grey bun could have cracked a walnut and whose bosom seemed armoured for siege warfare, stood beside a modest writing desk adorned with lists, ink, and a suspiciously new blotter. Her expression, like her shoes, had not altered. "Since the coronation, Lord Peter Wimsey," she said, nodding. "I expected the police, not a peer." "Police and peerage, Mrs. Vetch. 2 forms of pestilence best endured with strong tea and stronger nerves," Wimsey replied, easing into the straight-backed chair as though auditioning for a play set in 1847. "We are investigating the unfortunate death of Miss Gillian Foster, bridesmaid, poetess, and reputed thief of a good many hearts. I trust she was on cordial terms with the staff?" Mrs. Vetch blinked once. "She was no trouble to me." "Which is not quite the same thing as being pleasant," murmured Wimsey. "Did you see her yesterday afternoon?" "At 2:30, just after luncheon. She came into the linen room asking about a borrowed slip, claimed hers had gone missing, which I found rather odd. Ladies of her sort generally pack 3 of everything and borrow none." Wimsey raised an eyebrow. "Ladies of her sort, Mrs." Vetch looked him straight in the eye. "She was used to attention, my lord, from the gentleman." "Ah, the tragic affliction of charm." He smiled thinly. "And after that?" "She left about 10 minutes later. I had to unlock the spare cupboard for her. She said she needed something for the rehearsal. A petticoat with better drape, I think she said. I didn't see her again. I was doing the accounts. And the dress. No one has claimed to have seen it since the rehearsal fitting that morning," said Bunter, speaking up with the unobtrusive assurance of one accustomed to being both present and silent. Mrs. Vetch sniffed. "Miss Foster left it in the blue guest room. She changed before tea. I had Edith, the upstairs maid, check on the room at 4. No dress, but the window was open." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "Open?" "In the middle of the storm," she confirmed. "Odd, but Edith thought nothing of it. Said she assumed someone had opened it earlier and not latched it. And the room faces which direction? The back drive. One can just see the chapel roof if one stands on tiptoe," she added, as though this were mildly disreputable. Wimsey stood. "Thank you, Mrs. Vetch. You have the unmistakable air of one who sees through everyone's linen, figuratively and literally. I dare say you'll be running this house long after Basil and Leonora have put each other into nervous decline." She did not smile. "I intend to." As they stepped into the passage once more, Wimsey whispered, "Well, Bunter, what do we make of that?" "She dislikes the deceased. Also, she's lying about the accounts. Her ledger shows no entries past noon. And the upstairs maid will be able to confirm or deny the window story. Capital. Let's find this Edith. The upstairs maid may yet prove more useful than the Oxford dons who taught me moral philosophy." They found her in the upper corridor, kneeling beside a brass bucket and applying vinegar water to an ink stain with such ferocity it might have offended the ink's ancestors. Edith was young, with pale hands and a nervous tic, that sent her glancing over her shoulder every 20 seconds. "I didn't steal it," she blurted, before either of them spoke. "That's an excellent place to begin," said Whimsy, crouching beside her like a priest in confession. "You didn't steal what, precisely?" "The dress," she mumbled. "The scarlet one. Everyone says I must have. I was the last one who saw it." "Did you see it?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "No, sir, I went into the room at 4 o'clock. The window was wide open and the fire was lit, which made no sense. The dress wasn't on the hanger, nor anywhere I could see." "Was the bed rumpled?" "Yes, sir, like someone had lain down or—" Her mouth worked. "Or been placed. And did you notice anything else missing? Slippers, jewelry?" "No, sir, but there were footprints, muddy on the sill, inside. I wiped them before I thought." "Why?" "Because I thought it would look bad. Like I'd been snooping." Whimsy's expression did not change, but Bunter noted that his lordship's right eyelid twitched, almost imperceptibly. "Did you tell anyone about the footprints?" She hesitated. "Only Mrs. Vetch." Whimsy rose, brushing imaginary dust from his knees. "Then I suggest you remember exactly where they were, Edith, and do not go altering any further evidence. Someone has gone to quite a bit of trouble to suggest this was a simple case of undressed murder. I dislike being treated as if I wear my brains in my spats." They returned to the blue guest room, just as the rain began again, with fresh indignation. The open window was now shut. The fire burned low. Whimsy wandered the room without speaking, paused by the dressing table, picked up a hatpin, then a damp handkerchief half tucked behind a vase. He sniffed it. "Carbolic," he said, "and not of the usual household brand. More medicinal, possibly from a nurse's kit. Bunter, does the Fordingbridge family boast any invalids?" "Mr. Fordingbridge's sister is convalescing from a broken ankle. Nurse in residence since last week." "Of course," said Whimsy absently. "Where there is illness, there is privacy. And where there is privacy, there is opportunity." He turned to the window and looked out. Rain pooled on the gravel drive below. Beyond it, the chapel roof glistened darkly. "Someone went out through this window," he murmured. "Carrying the dress, perhaps. Why? Because it was evidence, not because it was valuable. Which suggests—" He stopped. A small smile crept over his lips. "Bunter, you remember the play we saw in Bloomsbury last spring? The one with the fake séance and the actor hiding behind the curtain?" "I do, my lord. A tedious piece, though I believe you laughed at the wrong moment." "Quite. There's something equally theatrical about this scene. A woman posed on a hearthrug, a window flung wide, footprints that vanish, and a garment spirited away in— Say a storm." He turned. "The curtain is rising, Bunter, but I fear we've not yet seen our leading actor." As they stepped into the corridor once more, the grandfather clock at the stairhead began to chime 4, eerily late. Whimsy paused and looked up. "That clock," he said thoughtfully. "It's 17 minutes slow, just like the parlor." "Clock? Indeed, my lord. Curious, isn't it?" He smiled again. "Two clocks stopped telling the truth just when someone else did." And with that, he descended the staircase, the rain hissing like a stage whisper against the windows, and the mystery deepening with every step. Whimsy's interest in the errant clocks was not idle curiosity, but a line of inquiry he knew would unspool further surprises. He paused by the mantelpiece in the drawing-room, where a silver carriage clock ticked stubbornly, its hands resolutely 15 minutes ahead of both the parlor and the grandfather timekeepers. The house seemed afflicted with a temporal schizophrenia, an odd affliction perhaps, but not unrelated to human misdirection. Time, as the bard's Hamlet remarked, is out of joint, and in this case, someone had most certainly meddled with the mechanism. Inspector Bledlow, standing awkwardly near the fireplace and casting occasional glances at the storm-lashed windows, cleared his throat. "My lord, the police are prepared to charge Mr. Basil Fordingbridge. His temper at the rehearsal was noted. Witnesses report he was heard threatening Miss Foster in the garden the day before the murder." Whimsy turned slowly, lips twitching with a mild disdain that could just pass for humor. "Ah, the ever-handy angry air motif. We might as well have brought in the village drunk and the exasperated gardener. One hardly imagines a murder committed without a sufficiently dramatic culprit." The inspector grunted and made a note. Whimsy knew the fellow would welcome any excuse to close the case promptly and without undue interference from a peer with a penchant for theatrics and Latin quotations. "But tell me, Inspector," Whimsy continued, "how firm is this alleged timeline? At what hour exactly was Mr. Fordingbridge in the garden?" "Between 3 and 3:30, Bledlow replied. "Several guests confirmed his presence there during the rehearsal break." "Was the murder discovered until after 4? Was it not?" "Precisely. Mrs. Ray found the body at 3:17, but she was mistaken about the time. The parlour clock is slow, as you have noted." "Indeed," said Whimsy, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "And the open window in the blue guest room? Does it face the garden?" "No, my lord, the back drive." "A curious detail." Whimsy's eyes flicked to Bunter. "Tell me, Bunter, did you note the footprint descriptions? Small, female, muddy and trailing inward on the windowsill." "Exactly so, Bunter." "Confirmed." Whimsy nodded slowly. "And yet no one saw anyone entering or leaving the house through that window?" "Only Edith mentioned it, my lord, and she feared being suspected." "Her servant who fears suspicion is a servant who holds knowledge," Whimsy said softly. "This is a house built on secrets, Bledlow, not on facts alone. The timeline you trust may be less reliable than a weather vane in a storm." Bledlow looked unconvinced, but wisely did not argue. Whimsy had a way of undermining confidence with a well-placed epigram. "If I may, Inspector," Whimsy said, "it would be prudent to check the movements of all staff and guests precisely between 2 and 4 o'clock. Not merely their whereabouts, but their moods, habits, and most tellingly, their opportunities." As the afternoon drew on, Whimsy methodically conducted a series of interviews. Each conversation was a delicate dance, probing for inconsistencies under a veneer of politeness. The butler, Mr. Hargreaves, was a large man with a nose perpetually bent downward in the contemplation of duty and dishwater. When asked about the soundproofing of the parlour, he informed Whimsy with unexpected precision that the double doors were fitted with old seals and stuffed velvet drapes, muffling most ordinary sounds. "Would a cry for help have been heard, do you think?" Whimsy inquired. "It's possible, my lord, but unlikely. The parlour is rarely used except for formal calls." Whimsy's gaze settled on the ornate door handles. "Curious, then, that Mrs. Ray should have found the body lying so theatrically on the rug." The butler shrugged. "Perhaps the killer wished her found that way. And yet," Whimsy murmured, "the dress had vanished." Turning to a different subject, Whimsy asked about the clocks. Hargreaves shrugged again. "The parlour clock runs slow. The grandfather clock isn't reliable. The carriage clock is always fast. It's been so for years." "Years," Whimsy repeated. "Odd that the parlour clock stopped at 3:17 on the very day the murder was discovered." "Maybe it's a coincidence," the butler offered. Whimsy smiled thinly. "A coincidence like the dress vanishing just when no one saw it?" Later, in the gloomy library, where heavy velvet curtains absorbed all light and most sound, Whimsy sat with Miss Leonora Price, the future Mrs. Fordingbridge. She was pale, her cheeks flushed with the effort of maintaining composure. "I understand, Miss Price," Whimsy began, "that you and Miss Foster were acquaintances." "More than that," Leonora said, her voice trembling slightly. "We were friends once. What happened? She was difficult, proud, secretive, and jealous." Leonora's eyes flashed. "She hated the idea of me marrying Basil. She said I was not worthy." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "Jealousy is a most potent ingredient in the murder stew. And she said things that frightened me, about secrets Basil kept, about the family. Secrets are often the true cause, though we dress them in anger or grief." He paused, fingers steepled. "Tell me, Miss Price, did Miss Foster own that scarlet dress?" "No," Leonora said sharply. "It was a loan from the housekeeper, an old gown from Basil's late mother." "Ah," said Whimsy softly. "An heirloom, then?" "Yes, I thought it beautiful. Gillian wanted to wear it at the rehearsal, but the housekeeper was wary." "Why?" "She said it was fragile and the embroidery could unravel in the rain. And yet it vanished in the rain, did it not?" Leonora glanced out at the dripping garden. "Yes." Whimsy rose. "Thank you, Miss Price. You have been most candid." The interview ended. But the pieces did not yet form a picture. The missing dress, the errant clocks, the poorly timed appearances, they were threads in a web still half spun. Later that evening, with the rain subsiding and the house settling into uneasy quiet, Wimsey returned to the blue guest room. He stood by the window, now tightly closed, the faint scent of carbolic still lingering in the air. Bunter entered quietly, holding a bundle of folded notes. "My lord," he said, "I've reviewed the maid's statements and the household logs. There is something curious. The nurse attending Miss Fordingbridge's sister, Miss Eliza Stanton, was absent from the grounds between 2:30 and 3:45. Wimsey's eyes lit. "And where was she?" Bunter shrugged. "No one knows. She claims to have been in the village, but no one can confirm this. It's as if she too vanished." "Interesting," Wimsey murmured. "The nurse's medicinal carbolic in the room, the footprints, the open window, all suggest a visit, one that ended abruptly." He looked at Bunter. "Prepare for a visit to Miss Stanton's sick room tomorrow. I fancy our next revelation lies in her convalescence." The night crept in, and the house settled into uneasy dreams. Somewhere clocks ticked inaccurately, and the scarlet dress remained a ghostly absence. Wimsey knew this was but the opening act in a drama of jealousies, half-truths, and calculated deception. "Time," he murmured to himself, "is not always a faithful witness. And truth, like a stubborn flame, sometimes requires coaxing to burn through the fog." With that, he extinguished the study lamp and stepped into the shadowed corridors of Wivton Grange, where every ticking second drew them closer to the heart of the mystery. The following morning was pallid and mist-shrouded, the sort of dawn that seemed reluctant to commit itself fully to daylight, apt perhaps for the mood at Wivton Grange. Lord Peter Wimsey arrived promptly at the sick-room, his appearance quietly disarming. Impeccable morning coat, silver-tipped walking stick, and an expression that suggested he had already unravelled more than the household would willingly admit. Miss Eliza Stanton lay propped among lace-edged pillows, her right ankle encased in a plaster cast, the white bandages stark against the pale green chintz. The nurse, a trim woman with tight lips and sharp eyes, introduced herself as Miss Helen Cartwright. She greeted Wimsey with the professional restraint of one well versed in the theatricality of illness. "I understand you have some questions about the afternoon of Miss Foster's death." "Miss Cartwright," Wimsey began, folding one leg over the other and settling into a chair with the grace of a cat with a pedigree. Miss Cartwright's smile was polite but brittle. "I was attending to Miss Stanton's needs all afternoon, my lord. I had no opportunity to leave her side." "A noble claim." Wimsey tapped his cane lightly on the floor. "However, I am told you were unaccounted for between 2:30 and 3:45, quite a substantial gap." She drew herself up. "That is incorrect, Lord Peter. I was in the adjacent sitting room, just out of sight but within earshot. Miss Stanton required her medicine and a light meal. And no one saw you?" "No visitors were allowed, my lord." "Understandable." Wimsey's gaze lingered on a faint bruise peeking beneath the cuff of her sleeve. "Miss Stanton, did you notice anything unusual yesterday? Any visitors, any noises?" Eliza Stanton's eyes fluttered open, a shadow crossing her face. "I thought I heard voices downstairs, but I was dozing." "Voices? Were they angry?" "No, just hushed. I couldn't make out words." "Thank you, Miss Stanton. And how is the ankle?" "Improving, but slow," she said wistfully. Wimsey inclined his head. "Miss Cartwright, might I ask about the medicines? Any carbolic or antiseptics?" "Only the prescribed lotions and tinctures, Lord Peter," she replied with firm assurance. "Curious," he murmured under his breath. The scent of medicinal carbolic was strong in the blue guest room, more potent than household. Antiseptics. Miss Cartwright's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Wimsey's next visit was to the stables, where the coachman, an earnest man named Thomas, greeted him with a smudge of hay on his cheek and a wary glance. "Mr. Thomas, a question was, anyone seen leaving the house between 3 and 4 yesterday? Any unusual comings or goings?" Thomas considered. "Not that I noticed, my lord. The rain was heavy. Few wanted to go far." "And the servants? Any leave their posts unexpectedly?" "Only Edith, the upstairs maid who was given permission to fetch a parcel from the village around 3:30. "Did she return promptly?" Thomas shrugged. She was back by 4, looking flustered. Flustered? Wimsey's interest piqued. Yes, my lord, said she dropped the parcel on the road. Curious indeed. Wimsey nodded slowly. Thank you, Thomas. Back inside, Wimsey found Edith scrubbing at the kitchen floor with renewed vigor. She glanced up, startled to see him. Edith, Wimsey said softly, your willingness to speak of footprints and open windows is commendable. Might I trouble you about the parcel you fetched yesterday? Her face paled. It was nothing, my lord. A letter from the village post. A letter that required such urgency that you braved the storm? Yes. Mrs. Vetch told me to fetch it for Miss Price. Miss Price? Wimsey's mind raced. The lady who is soon to marry Basil. Fordingbridge? Yes, my lord. Did Miss Price receive the letter? Yes. She read it immediately and then locked it in her room. Wimsey exchanged a glance with Bunter, who had followed silently. Letters locked away tended to contain secrets, not mere pleasantries. May I ask, Edith, what was in the letter? I don't know, my lord. Miss Price didn't show me. Understandable. Wimsey smiled thinly. But do you think it might relate to the missing dress? Edith hesitated, then nodded slowly. Thank you, Edith. You've been very helpful. Later, in the drawing room, Wimsey gathered the household once more. The storm had abated, but the tension remained thick. I have learned that the clocks in this house are not merely unreliable. They have been tampered with, Wimsey began. 2 clocks stopped precisely at the hour of Miss Foster's death. The carriage clock runs fast. Such discrepancies create confusion in alibis. He paused, letting this settle. Miss Price has received a letter she chose to conceal. Edith fetched it during the critical window of time. Nurse Cartwright claims constant attendance but was unaccounted for. The blue guest room, scene of the dress's disappearance, bears the scent of a medicinal carbolic, uncommon in the household. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. And footprints inside the windowsill suggest someone entered or left through an unconventional route. The room was silent. I suggest, Wimsey said, that we have not yet accounted for the true movements of all parties in the house. The missing dress is not merely a garment, but a cipher, a symbol of something larger. Jealousy, perhaps, or a secret worth hiding. Mrs. Vetch cleared her throat. Lord Peter, you imply that a member of this household is less innocent than they seem. Indeed, Wimsey replied, but innocence, like time, is often an illusion. He looked pointedly at Basil Fordingbridge, who shifted uncomfortably. Tomorrow, Wimsey concluded, we shall review the timelines with greater care. Until then, I suggest all remain within the house. The game, dear friends, is just beginning. As key, the guests dispersed. Wimsey caught Leonora Price's eye. She looked pale, her lips pressed tightly together. Miss Price, he said quietly, do you know what the letter contained? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Not entirely, but it hinted at old debts, old betrayals, things Basil's family would prefer forgotten. Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. Secrets buried in the past often sprout poisonous flowers in the present. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of smoke and the relentless ticking of clocks not quite right. Inside Wifeton Grange, the truth lurked, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the grey, damp veil still clinging to Wifeton Grange as Lord Peter Wimsey returned to the drawing-room, intent upon piecing together the tangled chronology of the previous day. The household had settled into a brittle routine. Whispers and sidelong glances replaced the conviviality customary for such an occasion. The rehearsal dinner was now a sombre memory, overshadowed by the scarlet stain of murder. Bunter was already poring over his meticulously kept notes when Wimsey entered, his fingers tracing the lines of the timeline in neat script. The sequence, my lord, is maddening. Witnesses' statements conflict subtly but significantly. Miss Price insists the letter arrived just before 3, yet Edith was dispatched before 3:30, and Nurse Cartwright's whereabouts remain nebulous. Wimsey tapped the tip of his cane thoughtfully. A puzzle indeed. But I have noted one particularly curious element. The carriage clock on the mantelpiece, fast by 15 minutes, was still running at the discovery of the body, whereas the parlour clock stopped, as we noted, at precisely 3:17. Bunter nodded. which implies that the parlour clock was deliberately stopped, perhaps by the murderer, or by someone aware that time was their greatest ally, Whimsy replied. We must consider who had access to the parlour in that critical window between 2 and 4. It is a small circle indeed. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Bledlow, whose expression combined frustration and guarded deference. Lord Peter, I have compiled the servants' movements as requested. Notably, Edith's absence aligns closely with the window of the murder, and Nurse Cartwright remains the most elusive figure. Her claim of constant attendance is contradicted by the housemaid, who recalls hearing voices faintly in the hall. Voices plural? Whimsy inquired. Yes, sir. Hushed, but definitely more than one. Then we might infer a secret meeting, perhaps. Bledlow hesitated. There is more. The postmaster in Wivton village confirmed no parcels were delivered or sent yesterday. Edith's claim of fetching a parcel might be a convenient fiction. Quite. So, Whimsy said, rising. Edith's flustered return now takes on a different hue. The three men moved toward the library, where Whimsy had arranged a makeshift board. On it lay a precise map of the house, with annotations marking entrances, sightlines and clock placements. Let us consider the open window in the blue guest room, Whimsy suggested. A window facing the back drive, no direct view of the garden, yet it was found ajar with muddy footprints on the sill. Whose might they be? Small, feminine, Bunter confirmed, which suggests Edith, Whimsy mused. Unless our young maid has unwittingly allowed another to use her guise, Bledlow interjected. What would be the motive to enter or exit through that window? To avoid detection? Exactly, Whimsy said. An escape route, or a clandestine entrance? He paused, then continued. Now the missing dress, scarlet. A conspicuous choice loaned by the housekeeper and supposedly kept safe due to its fragility. Its disappearance during the rainstorm was noted. Who would benefit from its absence? Bunter said, Miss Price said Gillian Foster wanted to wear it for the rehearsal. She was seen in it briefly before it vanished. Then the dress was a target, not the victim, Whimsy observed, a symbol to distract or implicate. The theatre. Jerve distraction, Bledlow muttered. And the scarlet dress becomes a red herring in the purest sense. Indeed, Whimsy smiled faintly, but every red herring has a tale worth following. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miss Price herself, her composure more brittle than the previous day. She requested a private word with Lord Peter, who led her into the adjacent conservatory. Miss Price, Whimsy began gently, I must insist you tell me more of this letter you received. Secrets whispered in shadows seldom bear good fruit. Leonora's hands trembled slightly as she folded and unfolded a small note. It was from an old family solicitor, mentions of debts long thought settled, and a certain Miss Foster, who threatened to expose matters best left buried. Basil's family has enemies, and not all are strangers. Enemies who might find their way to Wivton Grange, Whimsy murmured, or perhaps enemies within the household. Leonora looked away. I fear I do not know whom to trust. Trust. Miss Price is a luxury rarely afforded in mysteries, but fear, like grief, is a compass we must heed. Back in the drawing-room, Whimsy resumed his scrutiny of the house's layout, tracing pathways and noting discrepancies in alibis. The clock's discrepancies gnawed at him still. Why the deliberate stoppage of the parlour clock? What message did it convey? He called Bunter to his side. Fetch me the guest register and any notes about arrivals and departures yesterday. Minutes later, Bunter returned with a small ledger. Whimsy scanned the entries, noting names and times, cross-referencing them with the servants' accounts. There is a curious omission, Whimsy remarked. Mr. Fordingbridge arrived late last evening, yet there is no record of his carriage's departure or arrival time today. Bunter raised an eyebrow. Odd, my lord. More than odd. Someone must have taken pains to obscure it. Whimsy looked toward the windows, where rain had ceased but left the world glistening wet. I suggest we pay another visit to the stables and the servants' quarters. Those often overlooked corners may yet conceal overlooked truths. The day waned as Whimsy and Bunter proceeded with their investigation, noting the small details others dismissed, a scuffed boot heel by the servants' door, a misplaced glove. Near the garden gate, a faint trace of lipstick on a handkerchief folded in a drawer. Each triviality wove itself into the broader tapestry of the mystery, hinting at the undercurrents beneath Wiveton's polished veneer. As twilight deepened, Wimsey sat alone by the fire, reviewing his notes by the flickering light. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture remained elusive. Time, Bunter, he mused, may be the key, but not as a measure of hours and minutes. It is the human manipulation of time, the staged appearances, the false alibis, that holds the truth. Bunter nodded. Then the clocks, the footsteps, the missing dress, they are all part of a carefully choreographed performance. Precisely, and our task is to expose the playwright. The night pressed close around Wiveton Grange, its ancient walls harbouring secrets old and new. Somewhere within those shadows, the murderer waited, confident their deception would endure. But Lord Peter Wimsey, with his keen eye and sharper intellect, was already threading the strands that would unravel the carefully woven illusion. Tomorrow promised revelations, but tonight, the game of shadows and clocks continued, each tick bringing them closer to the final, inescapable truth. The dawn broke, slow and sullen over Wiveton Grange, a mist still clinging to the ancient oaks like a half-forgotten shroud. Lord Peter Wimsey, having spent a restless night traversing the intricate web of clues in his mind, set out once more into the labyrinthine heart of the mystery. The household, still burdened with suspicion and unease, had settled into an unnatural quiet, the kind that only follows a storm and a tragedy. His first call was to the servants' quarters, where Edith, the kitchen maid, was already up and bustling despite the palpable tension. She greeted him with an expression somewhere between apprehension and defiance. "Good morning, Edith. I trust the night has been less troublesome than the day before." She gave a tight smile. "I've tried to keep my head down, my lord. I'm afraid that won't suffice in matters such as these. Might I trouble you for some clarity regarding your journey to the village yesterday? Your story, while commendably consistent, contains a few intriguing inconsistencies." Edith's eyes flickered, the slightest hesitation betraying her practiced composure. "Please," Wimsey said gently, "there is no cause for alarm in speaking plainly. The truth, after all, is a far better shield than secrecy." She swallowed hard. "I did fetch the letter, my lord, but the parcel I mentioned was a lie I thought to protect Miss Price." "Protect her from what?" I don't rightly know. I only heard whispers that some wanted to harm her reputation. And the parcel. It was nothing, just something I imagined to cover the truth." Wimsey nodded, filing the confession away. "Very well, and the footprints at the blue guest-room window, might they be yours?" "No, my lord, I never went near that window." "Curious." He regarded her thoughtfully. "Thank you, Edith, your candor is appreciated." Next, he sought Nurse Cartwright, whose polished veneer seemed to crack ever so slightly under Wimsey's subtle but relentless scrutiny. In the drawing-room, he questioned her on the particulars of her movements. "You maintain you were with Miss Stanton continuously," Wimsey began. "Yet the housemaid claims to have heard voices in the hall, hushed but unmistakably multiple." Cartwright's response was measured but evasive. "I was attending to Miss Stanton's needs, Lord Peter. Any voices must have been from servants, going about their duties. Indeed, however, the smell of carbolic in the blue guest-room was noted by multiple witnesses. Such a strong medicinal scent is not common to this household." Cartwright's eyes narrowed for a moment, but she answered smoothly, "Perhaps a visitor brought it. It is not unheard of for patients to receive additional remedies." "Visitors during a storm, unannounced and unseen?" Wimsey's voice carried an edge. "Most peculiar." Before she could reply, the door opened, and Basil Fordingbridge entered, face drawn and eyes flickering with a mixture of guilt and anxiety. "Lord Peter," he said quickly, "I hear you are making inquiries. I can assure you I had no reason to harm Gillian Foster." "Of course," Wimsey said smoothly, "and yet the timing of your arrival and departure remains unexplained." Fordingbridge flushed. "I was unsettled by the events and left early, for the stables to collect my thoughts. A noble excuse, but the stables and their comings and goings will be of great interest today." With a curt nod, Wimsey dismissed him. Later, Bunter reported a fresh development. "My lord, I have examined the servant's ledger and found a curious entry. A visitor registered yesterday at the back door at precisely 2:45 p.m., one Miss Alice Thorne, a childhood friend of Miss Foster. Ah, Whimsy mused. Miss Thorne was not mentioned by anyone. Why the secrecy? A search of the visitor's book confirmed the entry, but no one claimed to have seen her. Which suggests, Whimsy said, that Miss Thorne arrived and departed without drawing attention. Bunter added, the back door is seldom used except by servants. Its lock is old and sometimes unreliable. Whimsy decided an inspection was in order. The back door revealed faint muddy smudges consistent with the footprints at the blue guest room window. A route began to take shape. From back door to window, a hidden path for ingress or escape. In the library, Whimsy laid out the evidence anew. We have a visitor unaccounted for, a missing dress, a letter containing vague but ominous threats, and a nurse who may not have been entirely truthful about her whereabouts. The inconsistencies in the clocks are more than mere negligence. They are deliberate. Bunter nodded. The stopped clock in the parlor marks the time of death, approximately 3:17 p.m. Yet the carriage clock continued to run, marking nearer to 3:30 when the body was discovered. Precisely, which means the murder was staged to appear at one time while actually occurring later or earlier. Whoever did this had intimate knowledge of the house's timepieces. A sudden thought struck Whimsy. The broken umbrella found in the garden shed. It bears traces of a particular pattern of stitching found only on the personal effects of one of the household staff. It seems that the killer may have inadvertently left behind more than just footprints. Then our murderer is among the servants, Bunter concluded. Not necessarily. An outsider with access to servants' belongings is equally possible. True enough, my lord. As the afternoon wore on, Whimsy requested the presence of Miss Leonora Price in the drawing-room. She arrived, pale but composed, clutching a small bundle of letters. These, she said quietly, are correspondences between Gillian Foster and an unknown correspondent. They hint at blackmail and threats made against Gillian's reputation. Whimsy sifted through the letters. The handwriting was elegant, but the tone dark, referencing debts to be paid and secrets that must remain buried. Who would want to silence Miss Foster? Whimsy asked softly. Leonora's gaze dropped. I fear the answer lies closer to home than we wish to admit. As evening approached, Whimsy requested one final interview. The housekeeper, Mrs. Vetch. In the dimly lit kitchen, amidst the aroma of stew and the quiet clatter of pots, Mrs. Vetch was brisk and businesslike. Understand, Mrs. Vetch, that the scarlet dress was particularly precious, Whimsy began. Who else knew of its whereabouts? Only myself, Miss Foster, and Miss Price, she replied. I can't fathom why it would vanish. The dress was kept in a locked wardrobe. Locked, Whimsy echoed. Yet the window to the blue guest room was found ajar, footprints muddy on the sill. How might that be reconciled? Mrs. Vetch wrung her hands. I've no idea, my lord. It all seems so impossible. Indeed, Whimsy murmured. But sometimes the impossible merely disguises the truth. He stood to leave, but paused. One last thing, the servants' keys. Were they all accounted for yesterday? Mrs. Vetch hesitated. I believe so, though Edith lost one key yesterday. Which key? The one for the blue guest room. The pieces slotted into place like a clockwork puzzle. Edith's absence during the critical window, her flustered return, the lost key, the footprints on the windowsill, the missing dress, all converged into a single, chilling possibility. Returning to the drawing room, Whimsy confided to Bunter, We have a complex interplay of deceit and desperation. Miss Foster's death was not a crime of passion, but one of cold calculation, a stratagem cloaked in the theatre of appearances. Bunter nodded gravely. What now, my lord? We wait, observe, and above all we listen. The house is a confessional. Its walls will tell us what words cannot. As night gathered once more over Wiveton Grange, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared for the next act in this dark play, one where the smallest detail might shatter the carefully constructed facade and expose the heart of the mystery in all its bitter truth. The air in Wiveton Grange felt heavier as the investigation threaded its way deeper into the shadows of yesterday's tragedy. The day had waned, and with it the last rays of sun leaving the house steeped in a dull, oppressive twilight that seemed to settle into every crevice like dust. Lord Peter Wimsey stood by the drawing-room window, his gaze flicking over the well-kept grounds now slick with lingering rain, and the half-glimpsed figures moving like spectres within. The household had resumed its uneasy hum, but beneath the polite surface tensions rippled. Bunter entered, his crisp footsteps a soft punctuation in the stillness. "My lord, I have compiled the latest observations and cross-referenced them with the statements. There is one matter that demands our immediate attention, the testimony regarding the garden gate." Wimsey turned, the faintest trace of a smile touching his lips, a smile reserved not for amusement, but for the delicate pleasure of a knot beginning to untangle. "Ah, the garden gate. The little detail that may well prove pivotal. Pray, elucidate." Bunter unfolded a page marked with neat annotations. Mrs. Vetch recalls hearing the gate's latch click at approximately 3:05 p.m. during the height of the storm. Yet no one accounts for anyone leaving or entering at that precise moment. The servants report no comings or goings. The family members were all accounted for indoors. Wimsey rubbed his chin thoughtfully. If the latch did indeed click, then someone was there, entering or departing unnoticed. A ghost in the storm, perhaps, or something less spectral but infinitely more sinister. Bunter glanced towards the window, eyes narrowed. The garden gate faces the lane leading to the village, a convenient point of ingress for anyone wishing to avoid the front entrance. Quite so, and given the muddied footprints by the blue guest room window, it suggests a route from the gate to the house's rear, avoiding detection. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. Which brings us back to the matter of Miss Alice Thorne, the visitor whose arrival was unreported by the family, but logged by the servants. She had every motive to visit Gillian Foster privately, old friends and shared secrets. Yet, none saw her, Bunter added, suggesting a clandestine meeting indeed. Now consider the timing. The latch at 3:05 p.m. and the parlour clock stopped at 3:17. A narrow window for the crime. If Miss Thorne arrived at 2:45 and left shortly after, her presence could coincide with the gate's sound. Bunter mused aloud. But why would she, or anyone, choose such an elaborate method of entry and exit? To avoid notice, a secret meeting as we suspected, and perhaps a hurried escape. A sudden knock announced the arrival of Inspector Bledlow, his expression grim but professional. "Lord Peter, I have received a report from the postmaster. He confirms no parcels were delivered yesterday as previously stated, but he did note an unrecorded telegram sent early yesterday morning to Wyveton Grange." Wimsey's interest was piqued. "Telegram, you say? From whom?" Bledlow produced a folded slip. Wimsey read aloud, "A message from an EH sent at 8:17 a.m. Urgent news for Miss Foster. Will call at once. Discretion paramount." "EH," murmured Wimsey. "Those initials may belong to Edward Hargrove, a solicitor from London, with known connections to the Fordingbridge family." "Indeed," Bledlow confirmed. "He arrived late in the afternoon but left again before the murder was discovered." "Another visitor cloaked in secrecy," Wimsey muttered. "One who may hold the key to Gillian's last hours." He paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. "Let us consider the motives. The letter, the blackmail, the threats, each a thread in a tapestry of desperation." Bunter pointed to the letters Leonora had presented. "There is also the curious reference to debts unpaid and the burden of truth in those correspondences, which suggests that money, reputation, and old family secrets intertwine here as surely as ivy on these ancient walls." Wimsey's thoughts drifted momentarily to the scarlet dress, its disappearance now taking on greater significance. If the dress was indeed intended for Gillian's performance at the rehearsal and vanished before she could wear it, could it have been a symbol, a token meant to provoke or mislead? Perhaps to implicate someone, Bunter suggested, or to mask another theft. Wimsey's gaze hardened. There is no coincidence here. Every element is part of a carefully staged performance. The dress, the missing key, the open window, all calculated. He rose and moved to the fireplace, absently turning a poker between his fingers. "We must also re-examine Nurse Cartwright's testimony. Her claim of constant attendance clashes with the maid's observations of multiple voices." "Indeed, my lord," Bledlow agreed, and the medicinal scent of carbolic in the blue guest room is not easily explained away. Whimsy smiled thinly. Carbolic is a weapon as well as a remedy. It masks disguises. It cleanses the visible, but not the invisible stains. The conversation was interrupted by the sudden entrance of Leonora Price, her usual composure replaced by a flicker of desperation. "Lord Peter," she said breathlessly, "there is something you must see." She handed Whimsy a small folded piece of fabric, a fragment of red silk, caught on the hem of a carpet runner near the back door. "A remnant of the missing dress," Whimsy surmised. "Yes," Leonora whispered. "It was torn there, as if in haste or struggle. Then the dress did not vanish by accident. It was taken or destroyed to conceal something." He paused, then added, "or to implicate someone." The group fell silent, each pondering the implications. Whimsy resumed, "This evidence aligns with our theory of a secret meeting near the back door and the blue guest room window." "Yet who could have orchestrated such a scheme?" Bledlow asked. "Someone with intimate knowledge of the household's rhythms and secrets," Whimsy replied, "and access to those who might be unwittingly complicit." He glanced at Leonora. "Miss Price, your letter suggested enemies not only outside, but within. Might you elaborate?" Leonora hesitated. "There have been tensions, old grievances among the staff, whispered disputes over inheritance and loyalty." "Old grievances," Whimsy murmured, "are the soil in which murders take root." "Furthermore," Bunter added, "I have uncovered a subtle discrepancy in the servants' alibis. The housemaid who reported the voices also recalls seeing Nurse Cartwright near the back door at an unaccounted time, which directly contradicts the nurse's claim of unbroken attendance," Whimsy said, arching an eyebrow. "Exactly," Bledlow said grimly. The pieces were tightening their noose around the truth. Whimsy rose once more, his mind alight with possibilities. "We must orchestrate a careful reenactment of the day's events. Time is our greatest ally and fiercest adversary. If we can reconstruct the comings and goings, the sound of the gate's latch, the movements in the storm, we might force the killer to reveal themselves in their own hesitation or error." Bunter began assembling notes for the reenactment, as Whimsy prepared to address the household. "This night I propose a gathering," Whimsy said quietly, "a recital of recollections under calm scrutiny. We shall observe reactions, inconsistencies, and perhaps the faintest tremor of guilt." As the servants assembled in the dimly lit drawing room, the storm outside having retreated to a distant murmur, Whimsy's voice rose, steady and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, the truth lies hidden among us, masked by fear and silence. Tonight we draw back the veil. Let us speak honestly, observe carefully, and listen attentively." Eyes darted nervously, some faces pale, others defiant. Whimsy continued, "We shall reconstruct the day's events, step by step, and in doing so uncover the truth no shadow can conceal." And so, beneath the watchful gaze of the ancient walls, the play of accusation and confession began. Each word, each glance, a thread pulled in the fabric of deception, inching ever closer to revelation. The atmosphere in the drawing room was taut as a bowstring, and the flickering candlelight cast long dancing shadows that seemed to waver with each hesitant admission and furtive glance. Lord Peter Whimsy, standing with the serene composure of a conductor ready to lead a difficult orchestra, surveyed the gathered company, a collection of faces, each harboring secrets and unease beneath their veneer of polite civility. He began, deliberately, "Let us revisit the timeline from the moment Miss Foster returned to Weaveton Grange on that ill-starred afternoon. Miss Price, you were among the first to see her upon arrival." Leonora nodded, steady despite the weight of the occasion. "Yes, Lord Peter. Gillian was visibly agitated, but insisted on rehearsing for the village pageant despite the weather." Whimsy inclined his head. "And you observed the dress, specifically the scarlet one, which now, tragically, has become a matter of grave interest." "Indeed. I had just handed it to her when the thunderstorm broke," Leonora continued. "She intended to try it on before the rehearsal. Then we may place the dress in the blue guest room at approximately 2:30 p.m. Whimsy turned toward the housemaid, Edith, whose cheeks had grown pale. "Miss Edith, you heard the voices in the garden quarters, correct?" "Yes, my lord," Edith replied, eyes downcast. "It sounded like a man and a woman, but I could not make out the words clearly. Could you identify the time?" "Shortly after 3, just before the gate clicked." "Did you see anyone?" "No, my lord." "The garden is thick with shrubbery. The storm masked any sound." A murmur rippled across the group. Bledlow interjected. "This confirms the gate's latch was manipulated during the storm, as Mrs. Vetch earlier testified." "Precisely," Whimsy said. "And the presence of voices implies a meeting of consequence, unseen, unheard by most." Shifted his attention to Nurse Cartwright, who sat rigidly near the fireplace. "Madam, you maintain you were with Miss Foster throughout the afternoon?" The nurse's lips pressed thin. "I did my utmost, Lord Peter, but Miss Foster was restless. Restless enough to leave your bedside, one might infer." Nurse Cartwright's eyes flickered momentarily, betraying a flicker of guilt before she masked it. "I may have stepped away momentarily. Precisely the moment when the voices were heard and the garden gate latched. Yes. Curious. Miss Edith, do you recall seeing the nurse near the garden at any point?" Edith hesitated. "Now that you mention it, yes, I thought it odd, but supposed she was fetching something." "Fetching something or someone?" Whimsy's eyes twinkled with an ironic light. "And now the question of that something, or someone, who might have been clandestinely meeting Miss Foster." A soft cough diverted the room's attention to Edward Hargrove, standing at the back, his face pale but composed. "I confess, I did see Miss Foster earlier in the day, shortly after my arrival. We spoke privately in the library. Did your conversation touch upon any matters that might explain the tension surrounding her?" Whimsy asked, folding his hands. Hargrove nodded. "Gillian confided in me about a certain debt, one that threatened her standing and perhaps her very safety." Bledlow frowned. "Debt? To whom?" "That I do not know, but she seemed deeply worried." Whimsy gave a slow nod. "Debt, secrets, meetings in the garden. The picture is becoming clearer." He turned to the butler, Mr. Fenwick, a man whose pallor betrayed no emotion, but whose eyes darted nervously. "Mr. Fenwick, you oversee the household staff. Were there any unusual movements or requests that day?" Fenwick swallowed audibly. There was a request from Miss Foster to borrow the silver salver, an item not usually removed from the sideboard. "Who handled that request?" "Leonora Price did." "Leonora, may I remind you of the salver's purpose?" Leonora's voice was calm but steady. "It was to deliver a message, Lord Peter. Miss Foster entrusted me with it." "Message, yes. To whom?" Leonora hesitated. "I do not know." The tension coiled tighter. Whimsy smiled his most courteous yet incisive smile. "A message delivered, address vanished, a gate latched, and voices overheard. It seems the threads are all here, awaiting the final weaving." He paced slowly, fingers tapping lightly against his chin. "Now, to the matter of the blue guest-room window. The maid Edith recalls footprints by the sill. Who might have approached by that route?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Bledlow interjected. "We have yet to verify the soundproofing. If the window was open, sounds could have carried or been muffled." "I have arranged for a test." Whimsy nodded approvingly. "Excellent, let us proceed. I also wish to observe the reactions as we discuss the peculiarities of the clocks and curtains." Heads turned, puzzled. "Clocks and curtains?" Leonora asked. "Ah, a seemingly trivial detail," Whimsy said, "but vital." The parlor clock stopped at 3:17, minutes after the gate's latch was heard. The curtain rod in the blue guest room was recently adjusted. Its misalignment, subtle, but detectable. "Why does this matter?" Edith asked, frowning. "Because it suggests deliberate tampering," Whimsy explained, "to conceal or facilitate something unspeakable." He turned back to the group. "Now, I invite you all to accompany me to the garden and blue guest room for a brief reenactment." They moved through the shadowed halls, the air thick with anticipation. Whimsy directed the household staff to recreate the positions and movements as closely as possible. Standing by the garden gate, he pointed. At this very spot, the latch was manipulated. The footsteps by the window suggest a hurried approach here. He gestured to the slightly ajar blue guest room window. The open window provided an entry point, or exit. The muffled voices overheard by Edith likely emanated from this room. Yet why? Leonora whispered. To conceal a meeting, or to hide a struggle? Whimsy's gaze softened, though no less sharp. Which brings us back to the torn fragment of the scarlet dress found near the back door. The evidence speaks of haste and violence, albeit discreet. He glanced about the faces assembled, measuring reactions. I propose one final exercise. We shall reconstruct the sequence of the dress's disappearance, who had access, who benefited, and who feared its unveiling. Suddenly, Edith spoke, her voice trembling. There is one more thing. The gardener, Mr. Gibbons, was seen near the blue guest room around 3 o'clock, though he claims he was pruning the rose bushes near the east wall. Bledlow nodded. We should question him. Whimsy's eyes lit with approval. Indeed. Let us proceed before memory fades or contrivances take root. As they departed toward the gardens, the storm clouds had broken to reveal a waxing moon, casting a pale silver light over the sodden earth. Shadows stretched long and distorted, much like the truths yet to be uncovered. Lord Peter Wimsey's, mind ever the keen blade, turned relentlessly, carving away at the layers of deception until the core, raw and bare, would finally be exposed. The stage was set, the players assembled, and beneath the surface of polite faces and soft voices, the deadly game approached its climax. The garden was a tangled mosaic of wet earth, bruised petals, and shadowed pathways, all rendered silver under the waning moon. The air carried a crispness born of the passing storm, a biting contrast to the oppressive warmth that had hung within Wyveton Grange's walls. Lord Peter Wimsey, accompanied by Bledlow and the ever-watchful Leonora Price, approached the gardeners. Tool shed, a modest, weather-beaten structure at the garden's edge. Mr. Gibbons, Wimsey began in that impeccably measured tone that demanded attention without ostentation, I am told you were observed near the blue guest room at the critical hour. The gardener, a broad-shouldered man with hands calloused from years of toil, and a face more accustomed to dirt than suspicion, blinked and shifted uneasily. Aye, sir. I was pruning the roses along the east wall, just as I said. Wimsey's gaze was piercing yet benevolent. A noble task, undoubtedly. Might I ask, how long does it customarily take to prune the roses in that section? Depends on the weather, sir. A good hour, perhaps. An hour in a thunderstorm? Bledlow interjected skeptically. Gibbons shrugged. Storm passed early. Afternoon, sir. Was mostly just spritzed by rain, not drenched. Ah, Wimsey said. And your whereabouts precisely at 3:17, the minute the parlour clock ceased its ticking? About then I was finishing up near the west hedge, far from the guest room. Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. Is it possible you crossed near the blue guest room window in your return? Maybe. Can't rightly say I kept track. Busy. With my roses, not the house, Leonora interjected gently. Did anyone see you? No one, miss. I work mostly alone. Curious, Wimsey mused, given that Miss Edith claims to have heard voices near the garden quarters shortly before the gate clicked. The gardener's jaw tightened. Voices? I heard none? Perhaps not, Wimsey replied, but your proximity at the time is of particular interest. A silence hung, charged with unspoken implications, before the gardener mumbled, I don't know nothing. Wimsey's smile was indulgent but firm. A most valuable confession, Mr. Gibbons, since in detective work the absence of knowledge often reveals far more than its presence. He turned on his heel and motioned for the others to follow deeper into the garden. Let us examine the rose bushes themselves. Bledlow, still frowning, followed as Wimsey crouched beside the damp earth beneath the thorny canopy. Note here, he said, brushing soil aside to reveal crushed petals mixed with a fragment of cloth. Deep scarlet, unmistakably part of the vanished dress. Leonora gasped softly. How could we have missed this? Wimsey's eyes gleamed. Because it is not the obvious that solves puzzles, but the slight, the subtle. This fragment tells us that the dress was torn not in the heat of a frantic struggle, but carefully, deliberately, and carried through this very path. He stood, scanning the darkened landscape with a critical eye. But by whom? And to what? Purpose? Bledlow rubbed his chin. Only the gardener had opportunity, but he denies knowledge. Opportunity is a necessary but not sufficient condition, Wimsey said. We require motive and means. Leonora stepped forward hesitantly. Might the dress have been used to conceal something? A weapon, a letter, something that someone wished to hide or deliver. Wimsey's smile was faint but approving. Astute, Miss Price. We shall not overlook any possibility. He motioned for Edith to join them. Miss Edith, do you recall? The silver salver Miss Foster asked you to deliver? Yes, my lord. To whom was it delivered? Edith glanced nervously at the group. I was to deliver it to a Mr. Hargrove, who was in the library. Indeed, Wimsey confirmed. And Mr. Hargrove, you admitted to a private conversation with Miss Foster concerning a debt. May I inquire, was this debt monetary or something more? Delicate? Hargrove's expression tightened imperceptibly. Financial, as far as I was aware. Yet debts often conceal psychological bonds, blackmail, jealousy, secret alliances. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. Were there any letters or notes exchanged? No letters that I saw. Curious, said Wimsey, considering the need for secrecy implied by the midnight rendezvous and the clandestine message delivery. The group's attention was drawn as Bledlow suddenly gestured toward the house. I have just had the parlour clock examined. It was deliberately stopped by an internal mechanism not obvious at first glance. Wimsey nodded, satisfaction barely masked. An act of time manipulation, then. Someone wished to create a false impression, perhaps an alibi. He folded his hands. Now consider the curtain in the blue guest room, which I have already noted was recently adjusted. Leonora frowned. But why tamper with curtains? 2. Conceal a window ajar, Wimsey replied. The open window would allow voices or noises to escape or perhaps to facilitate entry or exit. He turned suddenly toward Nurse Cartwright, whose composure had grown brittle under the mounting scrutiny. Madam, I must ask again, did you leave Miss Foster's side during that crucial hour? The nurse's eyes flickered with hesitation. I stepped away briefly. Precisely when voices were heard and the gate was latched. Yes. And why did you not disclose this earlier? Nurse Cartwright's lips trembled. I feared I would be blamed. Fear is an honest motive, though often a poor companion to truth. Wimsey intoned gently. The silence deepened, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down. Wimsey turned toward the fireplace in the drawing room, where a small, nearly invisible, indentation caught his eye. Notice here, an impression left by a small object pressed into the wood. Might this have been a message left hastily, or a mark to signal something? Bledlow bent low, examining. An unusual smudge, almost like a fingerprint. Wimsey reached into his pocket and produced a handkerchief. A thorough examination may reveal more, but the presence of such a mark confirms hurried, clandestine activity. He lifted his gaze to encompass the assembled company. The strands of this tapestry grow more intricate. The vanished dress, the tampered clocks and curtains, the secret message on the silver salver, the hushed voices by the gate, all threads woven by unseen hands. A soft rustle came from the far corner as the library door creaked open. A shadow fell across the threshold, and a figure stepped forth, one previously quiet yet no less pivotal. Wimsey's eyes narrowed slightly. It appears we have overlooked a vital participant. The figure's voice, low and measured, broke the tense stillness. Lord Peter, I believe you are closing in on truths some would rather remain buried. Wimsey smiled with that peculiar blend of charm and steel. Indeed, and the stage is set for the final act. The gathered company shifted uneasily, aware that the unfolding revelation would soon strike at the very heart of Wifton Grange's polished facade. Beneath the polite veneer lay a secret darker than any storm, and Lord Peter Wimsey was poised to unearth it with quiet precision. The figure who had just entered remained for a moment framed by the library doorway, half in shadow, his expression inscrutable. Lord Peter Wimsey's eyes, sharp as ever, assessed the man with a mixture of curiosity and quiet calculation. Mr. Gareth Lenton, Wimsey acknowledged smoothly, as though this was a mere formality. I trust the evening finds you well. Lenton inclined his head with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I would say so, Lord Peter, if it weren't for the circumstances that have drawn us together tonight. Whimsy's voice took on that arch tone, full of dry wit yet carrying unmistakable authority. Circumstances, Mr. Lenton, have a way of speaking more loudly than words, especially when a dress vanishes in the rain, clocks stop ticking, and secrets seek refuge behind curtains and locked doors. The room's atmosphere thickened with tension. The assembled company, though polite and restrained, felt the invisible tautness of threads tightening toward a revelation. Bledlow cleared his throat, but wisely said nothing, while Leonora's gaze never wavered from the newcomer. Mr. Lenton, Whimsy continued, you have, it seems, occupied a peculiar position within the household and its affairs, enough to command attention, yet sufficiently discreet to avoid suspicion. I wonder, how much of your presence here can be accounted for by the simple pursuit of business? Lenton's smile deepened, though it failed to reach his eyes. My business, as you say, is indeed discreet, Lord Peter. But I assure you, I have no desire to become embroiled in tragedy. Unfortunately, life is rarely so obliging, Whimsy said softly, stepping forward with measured grace. Allow me to remind you of the chronology, as we have painstakingly reconstructed it. He gestured to the mantel clock, still silent since that fateful moment. At precisely 3:17 p.m., the parlour clock halted. Shortly before, voices were heard near the garden gate. Miss Foster's dress vanished in the rain, leaving behind a telling fragment caught in the rose bushes. The blue guest room's curtain was deliberately altered and the window left ajar. The silver salver carried an encrypted message, though its delivery was obscured. Lenton's composure flickered, a shadow crossing his face. Your narrative is thorough but hardly conclusive. True, Whimsy admitted, yet the threads form a pattern when viewed in entirety. It is in the intersections, the seemingly trivial inconsistencies, where the truth resides. He turned toward the gathered witnesses. Consider the gardener, Mr. Gibbons. His insistence on pruning roses in a storm, the denial of voices heard nearby, and the fragment of scarlet cloth found in his domain. One might suspect him of opportunism, or perhaps of concealing knowledge. Gibbons shifted uneasily but remained silent. And Nurse Cartwright, Whimsy pressed, who left Miss Foster's side at a critical juncture, fearful to confess. Fear is an admission, though covert. The nurse's eyes glistened with unshed tears. But neither of these, Whimsy continued, explains the most enigmatic figure in this drama, Mr. Lenton himself. Lenton's gaze hardened. I am no murderer, Lord Peter, nor do I accuse you of such a crime, Whimsy replied smoothly. But your role in the debt to Miss Foster, the clandestine meeting in the library, and your unexpected presence this evening demand elucidation. Lenton took a slow breath. Miss Foster was in possession of a secret that jeopardized several reputations, including my own. She threatened exposure unless her debts were repaid, not all financial, I assure you. Whimsy's eyes twinkled with irony. Secrets, the currency of scandal and manipulation, oft more valuable than gold. The detective paused, drawing a delicate silver pen from his pocket and placing it on the mantelpiece with deliberate care. And what of the stopped clock, Mr. Lenton? Who had the skill and opportunity to halt it? And more importantly, why? Lenton hesitated, then gestured toward the study. I was in the library, as were several others. It is a room with many entrances and exits, soundproof to an extent, but not entirely impervious. Precisely, Whimsy said, which raises the question of timing. The clock's cessation was intended to mislead, to create a false window of alibi. But there is one element you have not accounted for. The effect of the storm on auditory perception. He looked pointedly at Bledlow. Might you remind us, Mr. Bledlow? Bledlow nodded. During the storm, the rumble of thunder and heavy rain would have masked any footsteps or voices outside, but once it subsided, even a whispered conversation would be distinct. Exactly, Whimsy said, and yet witnesses claim to have heard voices near the garden gate at a time when no one admits to being there. Lenton's jaw tightened. Voices can deceive. Indeed, Whimsy agreed, and so can appearances. He moved toward the window, glancing out at the garden shrouded in moonlight and mist. Let us now turn our attention to the most subtle. Clue: the tampering with the blue guest room's curtain, a deliberate act designed to conceal or reveal, to misdirect. Leonora, who had quietly observed the entire exchange, ventured, "Could it have been to allow entry or exit through the window?" "Possibly," Whimsy said, "but more likely to obscure a glimpse from the outside, to prevent prying eyes. Or ears." He paused, then added, "This, combined with the open window and the fragment of dress in the rose bushes, suggests a carefully orchestrated passage, someone coming or going unseen." Lenton's defenses faltered momentarily. "If you suggest I orchestrated this, I suggest only that the truth is far more complex than a single hand can manipulate. It requires a concert of motives, means, and opportunity. And sometimes, an unwitting accomplice." The room fell into silence again, save for the faint ticking of a restored clock. Somehow the parlor clock had resumed its measured rhythm. Whimsy smiled faintly, almost conspiratorially. "Now Mr. Lenton might—" "You explain the peculiar absence of the silver salver, which was supposed to be delivered but never accounted for afterward." The man's face paled. "I do not know." "But you do," Whimsy pressed, "for the salver bore a message, one that Miss Foster believed vital enough to entrust to you. Yet it was never found on your person or in the library." Lenton's glance flicked toward the fireplace, where the faint smudge had been observed. "Could it have been hidden there?" "An excellent conjecture," Whimsy said, "and the smudge, which appeared a fingerprint, was indeed partial evidence that someone hastily concealed an object." He looked around at the assembled group, every face now marked by tension and anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen, the stage is nearly set for the final act. The secrets of Wyveton Grange will soon emerge from the shadows, not with a flourish of the supernatural, but by the steady light of reason." Lenton's composure broke. "Enough games. What do you want of me?" Whimsy inclined his head slightly. "The truth, Mr. Lenton. The truth in full." The man's breath hitched. Then he spoke in a low voice. "Very well, I will tell you what I know, but beware. The consequences may be more unsettling than the mystery itself." Whimsy's expression softened, a flicker of respect crossing his features. "I have no doubt. But it is the truth, however discomforting, that sets us free." As the first tendrils of dawn began to thread pale gold through the leaded windows, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to unravel the final knot, where psychology, deceit, and desperate human frailty intertwined with the cold mechanics of crime. The narrative was complete. Only the revelation remained. The drawing room was hushed, every occupant caught in the taut expectancy that seems to hang in the air before the final curtain of a well-rehearsed play. Lord Peter Whimsy, standing near the hearth, held the attention, not by force but by that peculiar combination of aristocratic assurance and ironic detachment that had become his signature. The faintest smile played about his lips, as if amused by the anticipation itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have arrived at the moment when shadows must yield to light, and the theatre of secrets gives way to the plain stage of truth. It has been an exercise in subtlety, perhaps too subtle for some." He cast a glance at Gareth Lenton, who sat rigidly, his hands clenched as if to restrain some deeper turmoil. "Let us revisit the sequence," Whimsy continued, "not merely in chronological order, but through the prism of human nature and the intricate dance of motives." He motioned toward the shattered fragment of dress retrieved from the rose bushes. This, the initial piece of evidence, was not merely lost to the storm, but deliberately discarded, an act intended to misdirect, to suggest a hurried flight, to evoke sympathy and suspicion in equal measure. The dress, Whimsy said, was not the victim's alone. It was, in fact, part of a set, identical gowns intended for a masquerade ball that Miss Foster had planned, but which never came to pass. The missing garment was, in truth, worn by another. He let the words linger, watching the flicker of surprise ripple through the room. The vanishing dress was a ruse, a mask hiding the true movements of Miss Foster and another party within these very walls. Whimsy's gaze fixed on Nurse Cartwright. Miss Foster's nurse, who claimed ignorance, was herself implicated. through fear, not guilt, in concealing a second identity. A careful reading of the house's soundproofing reveals that voices heard near the garden gate were, in fact, an exchange between Miss Foster and her confidant. He paused, allowing the assembled company to absorb the revelation. The clock, stopped at 3:17, was a deliberate intervention designed to fabricate an alibi. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the house's mechanisms could have orchestrated such deception. All eyes turned to Gareth Lenton. You, Mr. Lenton, knew well of Miss Foster's financial precariousness and her threats to expose debts that would ruin reputations, including your own. Lenton's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Yet, Whimsy pressed, your presence alone is insufficient proof of guilt. It was the manipulation of the silver salver, carrying that cryptic message, that sealed the fate of the scheme. The salver was never delivered to you, but intercepted and hidden within the fireplace by the gardener, Mr. Gibbons. Gibbons stiffened, but said nothing. Mr. Gibbons, a man accustomed to silence, was enlisted unwittingly as a custodian of secrets, compelled by a mixture of loyalty and fear. Whimsy's eyes softened momentarily. But the motive, the heart of the matter, lies elsewhere. Turning to Leonora Bledlow, he said, Miss Bledlow's jealousy and concealed resentment towards Miss Foster, for perceived slights and social ascendance, created a tension that, when combined with opportunity, became combustible. Leonora's face paled, lips pressed tight. In truth, Whimsy concluded, it was Leonora who seized upon the vanished dress and the staged alibi to orchestrate the final act, a confrontation that, though unintended to kill, led to Miss Foster's fatal injury during a struggle in the rain. He stepped back, the room breathing in the weight of the unmasked reality, human frailty, pride, and fear. These are the true culprits, far more compelling and tragic than any spectral mystery. Leonora broke, voice trembling. It was an accident, I never meant. Whimsy's tone was gentle but unyielding. The law will, of course, judge according to its own measure, but here we understand the forces that brought about this catastrophe. He glanced at the assembled company with a hint of rueful irony. The vanished dress was but a costume in a drama of human passions, not supernatural trickery. As the first light of dawn crept through the window panes, Lord Peter lit a cigar, inhaled thoughtfully, and quipped, as Shakespeare reminds, "Thus the fault, dear friends, lies not in the stars but in ourselves." With a polite nod, he turned toward the door, leaving behind a room charged with revelation, regret, and the uneasy balm of truth restored.